I'm Zach Limhouse, staff historian with the Culture and Heritage Museums of York County for Southern Sound Radio. Joining me today, we have a very talented musician, Mr. Barrett Smith. Barrett is the bass player for Grammy award-winning band, the Steep Canyon Rangers. Barrett, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy touring schedule to speak with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to explore with you, Barrett, the music of the Carolina Piedmont and what that means to you. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to start where most great stories start, at the beginning. Could you tell me a little bit about how you got into this kind of music?
I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm actually the only member of the band from South Carolina. It's mostly a North Carolina-based band. And in the beginning, I was just a kid with a guitar in Columbia, and I got on a classical music track, and that was my passion for a long time. Went to the University of North Carolina, strangely, to study classical guitar. A lot of how I got into this music is wrapped up in this band, actually.
Moonlight ladies, rock-a-bye, sweet baby Jane, deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. Won't you let me go down in my dreams? And rock-a-bye, sweet baby Jane.
So I was studying classical guitar in Chapel Hill.
Gotcha.
Right, and then my buddies, these guys and other friends of mine were getting into playing bluegrass music. This is in the early mid 90s. They were getting really into it, and I was noticing that they were having so much fun playing. And while I loved what I was doing, it wasn't quite as much fun as what they were doing. Classical music versus bluegrass music. So I started getting into it, and then when I graduated from college, I moved back to Columbia, my hometown, and just very fortunately, through a strange series of events, fell in with some great South Carolina musicians. A bunch of guys who were really, really tremendous players. As far as like regional and historical significance, I fell in with this one guy, Randy Lucas. He's a banjo player and a guitar player and a true virtuoso, and a South Carolina institution in a way. Randy grew up playing the banjo. He was kind of like considered to be a banjo prodigy, as a child prodigy. And he got taken up by Snuffy Jenkins and the Hired Hands. And as a child, he toured with Snuffy Jenkins and the Hired Hands with that show. It was almost like he was in a vaudeville show or something. It was this old-timey thing that he was in. So Snuffy Jenkins' show would have music, of course, and comedy, and it seems to me that at some point they would kind of cart out the child banjo prodigy who was Randy. He was, he's maybe 10 years older than me. So I was really fortunate to fall into some kind of like historical lineage, legacy, significance through Randy, who became a really close friend of mine, and we played a million gigs together. So I never met Snuffy Jenkins or Greasy Medlin or any of those characters that were the Hired Hands people, but I have this direct link to them that I'm really proud of, especially as a South Carolinian, as a Carolinian in general. They were all over, I guess. That I'm part of that in some way.
You said that you started out as a kid with a guitar. About what age do you think you started playing?
Yeah, I was maybe 11 or 12 when I picked up a guitar. Didn't come from, I wasn't pushed into it, let's say that. I just did it on my own because I really enjoyed it. And then I was fortunate enough at a pretty young, I taught myself really early on. And then, I've been really fortunate my whole life, I feel like, to just come across great teachers and great collaborators, and a lot of them have kind of fallen into my lap, it seems. But that happened early on. I fell in with a classical guitar teacher who saw me play and said, I can help you out. And he became my teacher, my true teacher for the next, 4 or 5 years. I studied with him, and he was a great teacher. as it turns out. Mike Connors was his name. He doesn't live in South Carolina anymore. He's up in North Carolina.
What inspired you to pick up the guitar? Did you see someone play one day? Did you listen to records or albums, or what inspired you to pick up that guitar?
So when I picked up the guitar, this would be in the late 80s. And yeah, I mean, I think that I always, from a young age, I really wanted to play music, and I really loved like rock and roll music. The way it came to me at that age, what was popular was like hair bands. You know, like I really loved like Motley Crue, and then Guns N' Roses came along, and that Appetite for Destruction album was better than everything, and I loved that, and that was, I don't know, maybe as a child I fancied myself to be some like long hair, you know, Hollywood dude with guitar slinger guy. I don't remember. I just know I liked that music. And then some people around me got guitars. Like my buddy Lane, I had a guitar, and my sister got a guitar. And I think I got my start really from just picking up those guitars and fiddling around and learning a couple chords, and suddenly realizing, oh man, not only can I do this, I can figure it out, but I really, really like it. I really like it. And so there followed like, you know, just countless hours of diddling around with the guitar in my room by myself. I really bought into it, and I really worked really hard at it in retrospect, because I loved it so much. And it's like I couldn't wait to get home and get up in my room and play guitar. And then that teacher of mine came along, and then I had an avenue that made sense, a structure to put all that energy in, this classical music, and then that really lit it on fire, because I could track my progress and learn more difficult pieces, and you know, it was more of a tangible and kind of sanctioned educational process instead of me just kind of loosey-goosey figuring it out on my own. So yeah, that was the beginning for me, and it worked out that I guess University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill maybe at the time wanted, I don't know how I got in, you know, because that's a really difficult school to get into, especially, I mean, it used to be anyway, when you were out of state, it was really hard, and I was a good student, but not, you know, I wasn't applying to Harvard and Yale or anything, but I went up and auditioned there for a couple people who became friends and collaborators ultimately, and we really hit it off. I mean, I was like a 17-year-old kid, but I was really passionate about it, and I guess they saw that, and so they went to the admissions department and said, let's get this guy into the school. And going to school at Chapel Hill was, I mean, that's like everything to me. I met my wife there. Now I'm working with these guys all these years later. We all met at the university. So that's a real kind of juncture in my life there that I'm really, really grateful for.
Though you were not with the Steep Canyon Rangers on stage from the beginning, you have always been with the Steep Canyon Rangers from the very beginning, correct? In one capacity or another, right? For sure. Yeah, I mean, we've always been really close. Nikki, the fiddle player, and Mike, the mandolin player, and I, we had a band, you know, for years and years. Nikki fell off from it, and now it's just Mike and me. But we played, you know, tons of gigs together. The three of us, Mike Ashworth and Mike Gugino and I played a bunch of gigs together. I mean, did the music at Woody's wedding and Mike's wedding and Graham's wedding. You know, I was always around. And then Woody's wife
Shannon Whitworth is a great singer-songwriter. I was her like accompanist, you could say. I played in a band with her for years as well, which kind of tied me in with the band, and we would see each other a lot more. And I was always watching the band and feeling really proud of my buddies because they were accomplishing so much, winning Grammys and playing all these great venues, meeting all kinds of heroes of ours. I always felt very proud, and on some occasions very envious of them, because here I was playing music and trying to get by, and they were just rocking so hard. They did so well. So I mean, then they needed a bass player one day. That all happened kind of fast, and I think they signed me on for that bass player role mostly, or at least partially, out of a sense of familiarity and comfort. That's losing and gaining a member can be, it's a very impactful and it's very difficult for a band. So I think bringing me onto the bus very suddenly, I would imagine, was somewhat comforting for them to have a familiar face. We all knew each other so well. There were no surprises. And then it worked out musically, and I was very, very grateful for that, because this is, the best gig I've ever gotten.
So we've talked a lot about your guitar, but that's an interesting point. You were brought on with the Rangers to play the bass. At what point did you transition from guitar to bass?
I bought a bass years and years ago because a cheap one came along that somebody was trying to get rid of, and I paid, I want to say, $500 for a bass that just kind of sat in my house when I lived in Columbia, that I would fiddle around with a little bit, and people would come over for jam sessions and stuff, and it would be there, and I played it, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't see myself as any kind of bass player. And then one day, this is now many years ago, 2005 maybe, a band called Town Mountain, a great bluegrass band from Asheville, they right at the beginnings of that band, they were going on a tour and they needed a bass player, and I was available, and so I just signed on as the bass player. I was really pretty inexperienced, but I knew enough about music, and there were lots of similarities between the guitar and the bass as far as where the notes go. So I just kind of faked it until I made it and winged it, and playing with that band that was my initial education into how to play bass, especially in a traditional string band kind of format, how that works. So yeah, I learned to play bass playing with Town Mountain, and then once I learned it, it turns out bass players are way more in demand than guitar players are. A million guitar players all over the place, but people seem to really need bass players more. So I was getting a bunch of gigs just playing bass. By the time they needed a bass player, I was a bass player, and regardless of how well I can or can't play the bass, again, there was so much familiarity with the band, not just personally but musically, that I stepped onto a stage with these guys, and a lot of it was nothing new. I knew all of them very well musically, and so I could get in sync with them pretty well, and we did.
So you mentioned earlier that you play in a band with Mike Gugino, the mandolin player for the Rangers, and I have heard the two of you do some absolutely beautiful traditional Italian songs together. Can you speak on that? Because we want to discuss culture here today, and these beautiful traditional Italian songs. I think that fits right into our conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. That's something we feel really, really passionate about. It's a really cool thing. So Mike Gugino is on his dad's side is Sicilian. His grandfather is Sicilian. So years ago now, many years ago, Mike's father, I know his grandfather, played the violin for him and played some melodies and even gave him a couple tapes, I want to say, of this strange music that Mike had, and he brought it to me pretty quickly. He hadn't heard this music before. It was just at the moment that he was getting into American string band music, bluegrass music. Here this thing drops in his lap that's it's string music from a different place and a different culture, Italian string band music. So, you know, he brought it to me, and we found some resources. We found some sheet music, and we started studying this music. You know, and to us it sounded like The Godfather or like an Olive Garden commercial or something like that. It just sounded completely Italian to us. And we got deeper and deeper into it, and we started playing more and more. And we got these kind of standing, almost like dinner show gigs that we were doing in Brevard, North Carolina. And the deeper we got into it, the more we realized we had tapped into a style of music, a genre of music that's like, it's dying right now. You know, it's like, and that, you know, maybe there's no stopping that. It's got this inertia where it's just like, there's no revitalization of this music happening. There aren't many people in the world who play it, and here we've found it, and we're really, really into it and digging deeper and deeper and meeting all these old figures of people who were also saying, yeah, nobody plays this music, thanks for doing it. Now we recorded an album and started to really archive it, and trying to, like, you know, at least, well, we're trying to archive it, you know, as it dies. We're trying to create a record so that can be revisited for future generations, because as we study this music, those sources are few and far between. It's hard to find recordings of the music often, sheet music of it. You got to really dig deep. We found one other archivist out on the West Coast, this lady Sherry, who's really helped us out. But it's cool. I mean, one element of the music that I always find really interesting is that we have really indulged in bluegrass music in this band. And bluegrass music is a string genre of American music that, you know, it flourished at one point in the past, right? And then especially considering old time music, and just looking at that whole lineage, it had kind of its moment. It percolated for a long time. And then it really blew up with the folk revival all of a sudden. Like in the 60s, it was really hip and sexy to like be like a beatnik or a hippie, you know, playing this music in Washington Square Park or whatever. You know, it became fashionable, let's say. Well, in Italy, and that really helped. That's why we're here today, right? But without that folk revival, you wouldn't have the kind of festivals you have today, probably. Well, in Italy, there was a different story in that they had this traditional music of which people were really proud, but they never had this revival at all. In fact, they have the opposite, because this generation, let's say in the 60s and the 70s, this generation who could have done what we did in America, when they heard that music, to them it seemed old-timey, and it was associated with dark times. It was associated with fascism and Mussolini and like Italian nationalism that happened, that coincided with fascism and stuff that was not hip or sexy at all to them. So they heard that music and they said, well, this traditional Italian music is not cool at all. It's like what this older generation of like racist, fascist nationalists listen to. So it's kind of like if the folk revival had come around in the United States and all of these young people had said, oh, we don't like bluegrass music and old time music, it reminds us of racism and dark times and dark things about our past. You know, it never would have happened. It would have just fallen to the wayside. Well, that's what happened with the Italian music. It fell to the wayside. Nobody picked up on it. The younger generation didn't do it. I mean, there are some people who still play it, but very few. So now here we come, you know, we don't know about that whole history. We just bumbled into it and we found this music. We just think it's beautiful, regardless of any associations that it has to anything. We didn't know all that. We just thought it was beautiful music, just being beautiful music. So now we've unwittingly like unlocked that door again and brought it out. And, you know, who knows, maybe some young Italian people will start playing it and that's our dream, is for it to catch on, because it's beautiful music. It's really cool. It's really great to play, and like bluegrass music, it has a whole social aspect to it, a whole dance aspect to it, and most of all, it's just really nice music to listen to. The album's great, and it's great to put on for dinner music or around the house, whatever.
Well, on a personal note, as a musician myself, but on a professional note, as a historian, I want to commend you and Mike for keeping that tradition and keeping that history alive. You guys are doing some great work, so I want to thank you for that. Yeah.
Thanks. We're amateur archivists and historians. That's not we wouldn't claim to be that, but we've unwittingly become archivists and historians, and we feel really proud of it.
We discussed you moving from guitar to bass, but we briefly touched on you moving from classical guitar to bluegrass music. Can you tell me a little bit about what drew you to traditional bluegrass music and why you made that change from classical guitar to bluegrass?
I didn't sit around listening to classical music all the time. I still maintained my other interests.
Sure.
Right. And, I think at the time that I was studying classical guitar so intensely, there was another thing happening. I mean, I was kind of this hippie kid, and the idea of music festivals and bluegrass festivals and acoustic music, to my, like, the style of kid that I was, just culturally, that was very attractive, and it was what kept crossing my plate. I loved the Grateful Dead, and I saw that, oh wow, Jerry Garcia plays the banjo also. What's that all about? What is that? And that started opening doors. Eventually, it opened doors into the world of like Bela Fleck, Sam Bush, Jerry Douglas, these characters, these kind of super picker characters who at the time I heard that music and fell in love with that music. Not old time music, not Flatt and Scruggs, nothing like Arcane or Bill Monroe or any of that. I fell in love with their music, is what I found. I fell in love pretty hard. That music was almost like a classical bluegrass. It was like bluegrass instrumentation, but it wasn't uptight like classical music. It was improvised, but it was beautifully arranged and just so beautiful. That's what I fell in love with, and I'd say that was kind of my entryway into starting to study traditional music, because eventually I came to, it didn't take long, but eventually I came to love older acoustic music than that. They kind of took me down a rabbit hole from like, okay, they're doing that, and so they were in Newgrass Revival. Okay, well, they were in J.D. Crowe and the New South. They were the Bluegrass Album Band. Oh, the Bluegrass Album Band plays Flatt and Scruggs. Well, Flatt and Scruggs played Lester Flatt was in Bill Monroe and so I followed that down and eventually began becoming more, like, I guess you could say, literate and more knowledgeable and just with traditional bluegrass. I mean, I'm no expert, but I've listened to that stuff a ton and played that stuff a ton, and I do like it. Nevertheless, that music of Bela Fleck and those people, that's still what moves me the most and what I like the most.
I think two more questions that I really want to get your insight on. My first one is, I'm going to ask you to toot your own horn and brag on yourself, but brag on the Rangers a little bit too. We've discussed your impact on traditional music with the wonderful things you and Mike are doing with traditional Italian music. But do you want to speak any more, or would you please speak some more on what you believe your impact as a musician personally, or broader, the impact of the Rangers? What impact do you feel that you have had on this kind of music since the time you've been playing?
Well, I've had some impact, a big impact on the band and how the band operates, just me personally, because the guy I replaced, Charles, was an original member of the band and had been with the band from the very beginning. And the band learned together and evolved together. So when he was suddenly gone and I suddenly moved in, I mean, I am the way I am, and it impacted the band greatly. Mike Ashworth, the drummer, and I immediately formed this amazing bond musically, and ability to communicate together on lots of different levels that I think changed the band. Us being the foundation, the rhythm section, I think we created this new motor that really kind of set the band on fire a little bit, made the band a little more kind of like nimble and might do this and suddenly change to that in a telepathic kind of way. We do that more than they did before. It's just new blood. They were stuck in their ways is a little dramatic. They were just used to the way they did things, you know. And then here comes a whole new player in such a, not an out front role, but a foundational role, and it just kind of, it altered the DNA of the whole band, and in a way that really worked out. Rangers, in my opinion, having been just a fan and a friend for so long, has had impact on American music and the acoustic music world, in that this band's been such a figure in that scene for so long now. And that band has really played a pivotal role, I feel like, in how we deal with bluegrass music. What is bluegrass music? Do we adhere to a really traditional definition of bluegrass music, or can you put drums in bluegrass music? I mean, we travel around and people will say in different regions, they'll look at a band that to us isn't bluegrass music at all, but might just have a banjo in it, and so people call this band bluegrass. And we kind of recoil from that. That's the instant, like, oh wow, that's not bluegrass at all. But then we relax and say, you know what, if bluegrass is going to survive, you know, then it needs to change and adapt. And so call whatever you want bluegrass, as far as, I mean, always have the traditionalists and they keep it real, that we're always grateful for that. But as bluegrass music, as the genre expands, it's like jazz. Some dude in New Orleans in 1957 listened to John Coltrane and said, that's not jazz. And he was right. That's not jazz, according to a traditionalist in New Orleans. You know, but if jazz had not included, let's say, Miles Davis, where would it be? You know, if it had not included even Duke Ellington, which there was probably some stodgy old dude on a stoop in New Orleans saying like, "Oh God, don't play that garbage. It's not jazz. It's not the music that we made." And we feel the same way about bluegrass. It's like, kind of let everybody in the door and let's let this thing grow and survive and change and adapt or just gather dust in a museum, which is also fine and cool, but we want it to survive and live and adapt.
And you are definitely a part of that. And you have taken me seamlessly into the last thing I wanted to ask you, and you may have addressed it there, so if you have nothing else to add, that's fine. But I wanted to ask you how you feel that traditional bluegrass music, or even if I'm not going to put it in a box, let's just say your kind of music that you're playing with the Rangers, how have you seen that change and evolve over time, even in the time that you've been in the group?
there's a natural evolution that's been happening for a long time, and it is bluegrass music taking on other forms of music, jazz, rock and roll, classical music, and moving forward and surviving and adapting in that way. And I feel like our role in that is to sure take elements of those because we all play and love those kinds of music, but the kind of newish genre of Americana and this song-based, beautiful, really great songwriting, that's how we see ourselves right now. Graham Sharp is a great writer, and we see ourselves as bringing that Americana song-based mentality into bluegrass music and moving forward with that, I would say, in short.
Out of this town, let me out of this town.